Good afternoon, everybody. Want to welcome you to another Turnaround Pastors webinar. And today it's our privilege to have Dr. Kelton Hinton, who is the Associational Missionary of the Triangle East Baptist Association in North Carolina. Kelton has been a friend and actually a member of the team at Turnaround Pastors for a while now. Kelton, before we get into today's webinar on developing leaders in the smaller churches, why don't you just tell the folks a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go ahead and jump right on into it.
All right, bud. Thanks for the intro there. Yeah, I've been in this position 24 years, always will be 25 years as a associational mission strategist is my official title these days. Came to this position as from the foreign mission field in Africa and served in France and Africa with my wife as missionaries about 7 years. And prior to that, and throughout all my years, I've always been either a church planter or a fantastic supporter of church planting. So that's some of the highlights of my background in ministry.
Fantastic. Tell us just a little bit about how the ministry is there in your part of North Carolina, how the churches are doing, and maybe how folks who are so inclined, can be in prayer for you and your congregations.
All righty. The association of churches that I work with or network, about 72 churches. We're primarily in Johnston County. We spread over into 6 others. So we're got churches in 7 contiguous counties here in Eastern North Carolina. If you know where Raleigh is, and many people do, we're just east of Raleigh. Hence our title, Triangle East Baptist Association. The triangle is Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill form the RTP, the Research Triangle Park. In the end, that is the motor for growth for the central part of our state. So people are flocking into our state from all over the country, have been for a number of years, and we're just to the southeast of that triangle. We're the fastest growing county in North Carolina now for the 3rd decade. So we've had a huge demographic growth with more to come. So this has been a huge challenge for our churches. We've been historically primarily a rural association network of churches, but now we're majorly suburbia, okay, because we're on the border of a large metro area and getting our own urbanization in some few towns and cities. We're still not there yet, but anyway, we're definitely in suburbia. All the farms are being sold right and left and being replaced with tracts of 100, 200, 500 homes at a whack. So we are scrambling to catch up with our demographic growth. Churches at this point, as of the fall, last data points I've got, approximately 50% of our churches are growing numerically and have been over the last 5 years. And then the other 50% have plateaued or in decline. So we literally are at a 50-50 split at this point. That has been an improvement. We've worked on this for many years to get those numbers that high. So I don't know how things are in your area, but we are in a relatively healthy area. People want to live here. They're moving here from all over the country. And so we're able to ride that demographic growth somewhat.
Fantastic. With regard to today's topic, leadership development in the smaller congregations or the solo pastor church, how are your churches doing in this regard? How are they, because of your ministry, are they all on top of that, or are they struggling like most of the rest of the small churches?
It is a mixed bag, but 60% of my pastors I work with are bivocational. Okay. So not only are they in solo pastorate situations, but a 60% either have another full-time job or they're a student as their other job, or they're a retiree with Social Security income coming in as their secondary source of income. Okay. So that means they're young, middle-aged, and senior adults in their life cycle, their personal life cycle. Okay. They're all serving in those 60% are largely run 100 or fewer in church attendance. Okay. Basically, in my region, about 100 in attendance is the break point between part time and or bivocational and full time status.
Okay.
So when working with the church, if they're running right at 100, I'll say, y'all are right at the edge. You could engage a full time pastor, especially if his wife works in the school system or something that can supplement that income from the church.
Okay. Fantastic.
So, anyway, of those fellows, some of them are growing. Percentage wise, the smaller churches struggle a little bit with growth, and we'll unpack the reasons for that in my presentation in just a few minutes. The particular challenges in the small church that preclude or hinder numerical growth. There is some very specific particularities for small churches, smaller membership churches in this regard.
Okay.
So to answer your question, they lag a little bit in the growth percentages than my larger churches do. Okay.
Gotcha. Okay. So I'll step off to the side and turn the microphone over to you, so to speak,
Okay.
and just let me know when you want me to put that up for you, for your people to see.
Fine.
And so I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to zip my lip and let you run.
Okay. All righty. It's great to see everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I hope that you get something out of the presentation today that is helpful for you in your particular context. As the title shows, I'm looking at developing leaders specifically in a small church. So I'm going to focus today on three types of small churches, to the very smallest to mid-size and a larger, but still in the small category. So let me define, first of all, the smallest grouping of churches that I've got, and that's what I call house churches. House churches in my area, we don't have a lot of them, but we do have a few, primarily among our language groups. Hispanic congregations in particular often start out as house churches. This is the primary church planting model that is used in our area. So generally a house church situation generally has under 25 people that meet together in someone's home or in actually sometimes in multiple locations, 2 or 3 homes that they rotate. And usually a house church is oriented around 1 or 2 families and their extended families along with them, and there some friends that come in and join them. In some areas, it says may even get up to 5 to 12 families. Obviously, they don't all show up at the same time because you couldn't get in a house, but 5 to 12 families or single units under their influence. So when I'm talking about a house church, I'm talking about generally, basically, if you think in your mind, 25 and fewer, and that's including the kids running around. Okay. So there is a simple definition. Jason Johnson online, you can look him up, has a simple definition of house church. And he says simply this, and it resonates from what I've seen. A house church is a group of believers who meet in a home to function as a New Testament church. Now, this usually means a focus on the basics of prayer, fellowship, learning, and evangelism among a smaller group of people. And all are encouraged to participate, 100% participation, and using their spiritual gifts and sharing life together in community. And that extends beyond their meeting times. So that's a kind of extended definition of these house churches. So let me address the question here. How do you find and develop leaders in a house church context? So let me unpack that just for a moment. In a house church situation or in the house church model, the leaders are often self-identified. Generally, there's 3 leaders that rise to the surface in the house church model. One is the hosts of the group, the couple that's actually opening up their home for the group to meet in. Okay. So they are the host, and their role is to accommodate people, to invite people, make room, bring in chairs, make sure snacks are there, and everybody's as comfortable as they can be in that particular, in their home setting. There's another couple that will surface, or at least one person that has some bit of recognized gifts or valued for their teaching ability. They have a way with words. They can explain things. They can unpack difficult concepts in simple terms. And everyone in the group realizes they got a talent for this. And they often will push them into that role. That's the second role. And then there's often a third couple that will be more the gatherers. They pay attention to the atmosphere of the group. They're very outgoing and friendly. They keep people laughing, and they also will organize who's bringing food this week, the hospitality side, and that sort of thing. And somebody in there has to make at least some thought towards what they're going to do with the kids. Okay, if the kids are going to be separate from the adults in the house church model. So let's get back to your role as a pastor. So, what's a pastor such as yourself? How do you develop leaders in the house church model? And there's two ways to do this. One is I would love to think, or at least in the ideal situation in my mind, that churches plant churches. So that a church like yours would see the opportunity, say in a new neighborhood, to plant a house church in that neighborhood of 200 new homes. So you as a pastor in your established church would call out the call and talk about the need, talk about the opportunity, and describe what it would look like, showing some pictures or whatever. So you would actually call out the call from your church members to say, "Well, who lives in the named subdivision? Do you have any desire to reach your neighborhood for Jesus, or to build community in your new neighborhood, your new named neighborhood that nobody knows anybody?" Okay. So your first role is to call out the called, encourage them. And you can talk about leadership roles that are needed. And you can actually either yourself, or maybe if you have some staff, have some others come alongside and train up those leaders that show an interest. So basically, in this sense, you're a little bit hands-off approach. You're not actually leading the house church yourself. You're actually calling out leaders to lead that small group. What we may call a missional community is a very favored term these days. That might move to what's called a micro church, or a house church is another term that's often used again at these categories. So your role as leadership developer is to call out the called and talk about the need and see if there's anybody in your church fellowship that would open up their home to their neighbors, friends, neighbors, acquaintances, relatives, to start a church in their home. So again, your role as pastor is a little bit hands off. You're not leading this particular group yourself, but you're helping it to get established. Now, if it's, I'll just stay with that. I'm not going to complicate things. Okay. Let's move on to the next size church. And at the end, by the way, we're going to have questions. So hang on to your questions, make some notes for yourself, and we'll pull these questions at the end. So the next size church I'll look at, still small, is what we call the family chapel church. And most of you are familiar with this term, and they probably pastored one or more family chapel churches. You may be in one today. And I'm pulling some notes on this from, there's a document. In fact, Bud, throw this one up, page 2 of the document where it says Family Chapel Church. I think it's easier to work from this list where everybody's got their eyeballs on it. I'm pulling this from in the types of churches, compiled by Norris Smith, and he's referencing Speed Lee's and D.G. McCoury in pulling these details together. So you can see the Family Chapel, second page there, Bud.
All right.
Yeah.
Give me a
Move
second here.
forward, one more page there.
And let's see here if I can figure out how to do that. Let's see here.
There we
you
go.
go.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah, it'd be easier just to highlight some things. If you look over this list with me, if you can see it, family chapel characteristics, I'm sure you have seen this animal, okay? Again, size is 100 or below in regular attendees. In my context, this is de facto a bivocational church. They just don't bring enough money to pay a pastor for a full-time salary. In my area, very rural, okay, but it can be urban as well. Look at this single cell and organization. They're small enough that everybody does everything together. It's one big bloated cell, and they do not want to split or divide in any sort of fashion because they feel like it will hurt them, the fellowship that is so important to them. In fact, for them, you can see number 5, their history is very important. And that's one of the characteristics of a small church that makes it so difficult to grow because they're historical oriented. They're often, as I say, facing backwards as opposed to facing forwards in their point of view and in their planning. In fact, look at number 10, annual events, not long range planning is the focus of this group. That's an example of what I'm saying is rearward focus or historical focus versus forward focusing. And look at number 11, relationships are more important than program. So again, if you got a really single cell here and everybody's doing everything together, relationships are key, fellowship is huge. So it makes it really difficult for a pastor to step into this situation and to make a difference. In fact, let's look at leadership here, the next piece. In this context, the pastor is actually a chaplain. He is not considered a leader, or if he, no, he's not. I wouldn't even qualify. He's not considered a leader. He just is. He's got a ministry of presence. Over time, and we'll say this, over time, you do earn the right to speak a little bit, but we're talking 5 years or more. Okay. It takes a while to integrate yourself into a family chapel church. So the best thing you do is just hang on and ministry of presence there. Plus, look at that number 4 under leadership. The pastor works with their administration. Listen, in a family chapel church, as Lyle Saller says, he calls him a cat. He said, you don't own a cat, right? A cat chooses to live with you. You can go on vacation for 2 weeks and leave your cat, and that cat will be right there when you come back. They will have survived just fine on mice and rodents and bugs and anything else that they can find out in the woods. A small church can live with a pastor or without them equally well. They've got people within their group that can function in pastoral roles just as easily and sometimes better than a new pastor can do. So that number 4, that pastor has to work with their administration. You have to realize who's who around here and work with and through those people. And see, number 3 under leadership, the decision makers are patriarchs or matriarchs in the church. So you only got about 3 or 4 key families here, and probably 80% or more of the people in that church are actually related by blood or marriage. So be careful what you say about anybody because it's pretty likely that they're related to everyone else in the church. Now look at conflict over there. Again, this catches the pastors off guard. Conflict is very hidden. He doesn't know anything's brewing until it explodes in his. And look at here, number 3, conflict arises when their system is threatened. So when you're trying to introduce new ideas or new things or new processes, new programs, you are threatening the status quo. And that's going to create some conflict. And unfortunately, pastor can't win. Yeah. I want that maybe a little bit too dramatic, but it can be very frustrating. I'm sure that many of you have been here. So let's look and see how would you actually do leadership development in a family chapel church? So your role in this size church is very much nuanced. You have to use some real finesse and some real skills to do this well. You as pastor are the guest, singular, and the outsider. You are really in a very difficult leadership position if you're not even considered truly an insider in the group. It's a very strange place to be. You have the title of pastor, but none of the authority or the respect that comes with that title. And if you served in larger churches and you come to this church, you're wondering, whoa, planet am I on? This is so different from what I grew up in or what I'm familiar with. In fact, in the family chapel church, you only become pastor really one family at a time as you go through significant life events with them, like births, deaths, of course, funerals, marriages, divorces, even um, deaths, hospital visits. You you become pastor really literally one family at a time. And it oftentimes takes a good 5 years before you've had those experiences with the majority of your church families. And there's a little joke that goes wrong, says that there's an old saying that says, you're in a small church when the only things that change on the deacon board are the first name. Think about that. First names, only thing that changed. Last names are always the same. So here's your clue. Here's your clue for leadership development. Instead of lamenting that fact that key families are in charge of this church, instead of railing against that or fussing about it or struggling about it, take advantage of that reality. Okay. First of all, pray to God and say, God, please help me to find a Joshua to nurture among this flock. Ask him to point out somebody or more than one even, and bring to your attention and look closely at the next generation coming up among the key families. Let's say identify a young person, a teenager, maybe a young adult in their early 20s, especially if they're still at home and haven't moved away, but more likely teenager, juniors and seniors in high school, possibly. Is there a young man that you can befriend, that you can nurture along, you can encourage or influence for the good? In other words, could you pour into this young man even before he is grown and put into leadership? See, because he's one of those key families. So after all, it's just a matter of time before that mantle of leadership will fall onto his shoulders in that church. So you may as well prepare him for the role while he still has a teachable spirit. So again, my point is this: in that family chapel church, you got key families. So rather than fight against the goads, let's roll with it and let's make it work to your advantage. Look to the next generation of young men that's going to be soon, within a few years, certainly once they get their education behind them and maybe get married, have a child or two, they will be on that deacon board and they will become chairman of this and chairman of that. And they will inherit many of the roles that their own fathers and uncles had served in your current church setting. So that's that's how my take on developing leaders within the family chapel church. So now let's take a look at the third one. And but if you'll go on down to page 4, and let's look at the what is called the collective alliances type of church. And it's just easier to go through this list a little bit. Characteristics. Now, this church is obviously a bit bigger. It's above 100, but still under 175 in regular attendees. Now, this is a decent sized church in my area. In fact, nationwide, I think the average size church is attendance is only 75, 50 to 75 in America. Okay. It's average size. So when we're talking about small churches in our conversation today, this is a big chunk of our churches that are across this land. So you can see that attendees. Now they're located in all different areas, country, towns, cities, even. Now in this one, it's very interesting that to get above 100, that congregation is moving into what I'm calling a multi-cellular organization. Whereas the family chapel function as a single cell organization, in a church above 100, to grow above 100, they've got to be acting in the reality of a multicellular organization. The choir is a group, the women's group is a group, the men's group is one. One or more Sunday school classes might be quite large, function as one. You might have a youth group, another. So you've got multiple groups with multiple leaders around. And so that being the case, the pastor needs to be a central leader. Look at number 3, those characteristics. Pastor is a central leader. And it's interesting that at this age, at this size church, this is a good size for growing a church numerically, okay? Because for one, they they're ready for growth. Now, the challenge is they don't know a lot because they've not done a lot in the past. So they look to the pastor to give them some guidance and direction on the how to, what should we do, how should we do it, which is great. Gives him a good opportunity to speak into the leadership. And of course, new people will glob on to the new pastor as well. But it's also can be very challenging because it creates a lot of dependency on the pastor as well. And we see a lot of pastoral burnout at this level of church because they still don't have a lot of finances and they haven't really added any paid staff yet because they can't afford them. Got some volunteer staff, but nobody paid. And so there's a lot of activity riding on that pastor's shoulders. And so a lot of burnout in this particular size church. But as you can see under leadership, the second point here, that the pastor is a key figure. In fact, Miles Schaller at the bottom, instead of the king, he calls this size church like more like a border collie that's got his eyes really fixed on you. He is watching your every move. If you say point this way, he takes off that way. If you speak a command, he takes off and does what you ask him to do. But then he comes right back to you and looks for his next instructions. In other words, a border collie doesn't go off and do his own thing. He is so tied into and trained to follow the master's signals that they work together as a well-oiled team, but it is very, very, what is the word? Based on the pastor's role. He is central in that relationship. So, as a pastor of a multi-seminary group, you've got to build these relationships with key leaders, the women's leader, the men's leader, key, the youth group leader, the senior adult class. You've got to figure out who are the leaders here, and you've got to negotiate with all of them. You still have patriarchs and matriarchs around, like in the family chapel church, but it has shifted somewhat to bigger groups of organizations and what have you. So your administrative skills are really coming into play on this one, as well as your speaking skills, because they're going to look for some pretty good preaching in the pulpit. Now, there is conflict at this level, and oftentimes that conflict will be focused on the pastor because with your leadership and your new ideas you're throwing in there, you are asking them to do things they have never done before. Okay. And there's always going to be some resistance to change by most anybody. We all like status quo. So the more change you implement, the more resentment you may develop and you may become the target. You're often easily triangled with others, newcomers versus the old timers, and you're caught in the middle, all kinds of conflicts. So this size church can be great in the sense of you have, or you, at least you feel like you have lots of opportunity to lead. But the downside is that you can get burned out because being so busy. And also you can get blindsided by conflict and being triangled and you get fired, even with all the growth. I've seen this happen so many times with all the new people coming on board. They side with the pastor, and then as the division happens between the old guard and the new guard. And unfortunately, those have been around a while, a couple of generations at least. They keep up with these things. And when they sense that they're fixing to be outnumbered in the church and they're not liking everything that's going on, the new stuff, they will force a church vote on the pastor before they get outvoted. So when that church is approaching, you might say 100% growth in the tenure of that pastor, if they don't like him, the old guard, they will make sure that he's voted out or they are outvoted as the old guard. In fact, let me just mention something about old berries and new berries. If y'all been in any of the turnaround pastor boot camps, y'all been familiar with this about old berries refers to people that were there in the church before you got there. You have of the old berries, older berries that are more mature than you, okay? They're older than you. And then you got younger old berries, okay? That are younger than you chronologically, but they were before you got there. And then you got the new berries, and some are older and some are younger too. So mixing up those berries, and you're going to want, you probably spend a lot of your time with the new berries and want to, but I just challenge you as a leader, you need to work with both the old berries and the new berries, okay? Both of them. You cannot ignore either side. If you do, you're going to have some conflict will surely develop for sure. So, conflict resolution skills at this level are a must because it's almost inevitable. All kinds of different schisms can develop quickly when you've had a lot of growth. Okay. So finally, let me talk about a plan for developing leaders. But this is at the bottom of page 4 with the circles there.
Okay.
Make sure we can see
Uh,
the circles. There you go.
there we go.
All right. I want to talk about something that's called missional leadership pipeline. Okay. I didn't make it up. This is coming from the North American Mission Board stuff. And it looks at something that I think was very important. When we are talking about evangelizing and discipling, if you look at this phase, that first one, it's where it says leading self right there. That's where it begins. Okay. That's when a fellow is one to the Lord right there. And as you disciple him, you're teaching him how to pray, how to have a daily quiet time, how to study the word, how to keep a prayer journal, that sort of thing. That's level 1, phase 1, leading self. And in that process, we call that the discovery phase, okay, or actions to discover who am I in Christ, okay? So that's his work. Who am I in Christ? Along with that is how has God wired me? What are the spiritual gifts that he has given to me? What do I have any sense of calling on my life at all? Maybe still a little early to answer those questions, but it's good to ask the question. But look at this. You don't stop there. Once you get what this new Christian life is all about, then lead them into level 2 or the second phase, which is leading others. So this is them being able to actually share their faith with another person. Okay. So they're able to walk someone else through the process or commitment to Christ, just like they themselves have already experienced. Okay. So not only they're able to lead themselves, but now they're actually able to share it with another person in leading others down this pathway. Then we move into what's phase 3, and this is leading leaders. So this is when they actually, let me back up one more thing. On leading others in level, this phase 2 right here, that's when they start volunteering and serving on committees and they kind of learn how churches run. They may start as a greeter, may move to an usher. They may serve in some role in Sunday school or an outreach team or something. So they're just learning what church is like here and how you live out the Christian faith in this congregation. But over time, then they move to phase 3 of leading leaders. So they become chairman of a key committee, for example, missions committee or finance, budget and finance, or they may even become a deacon in the church and they have responsibilities to lead others. If you have a Sunday school program, maybe they're Sunday school director, things of that nature. So they have some experience and know how the church operates and know how it functions, and they're able to actually work with other leaders within the church. Okay. So that's this developing part of the equation. But look, it doesn't end there. All right. Look at that phase 4, leading mission. Let me unpack this one. Very important. Once a person has come to faith in Christ, which is phase 1, they're able to evangelize and share their faith with another. That's phase 2, leading others. And then they're an active participant and servant in the church. And if got that down, okay, may take several years, of course, then we want to encourage them to take it outside the four walls. Okay. Take what you've learned here in this church and look around in our environment. What does our environment need? Do we have a local elementary school that needs to be adopted? Is there a apartment complex down the road that needs to have some sort of a missional community established in it? Is there a neighborhood that needs a missional community? Is there a new church that's needed, or some kind of a ministry, ongoing ministry? And the thing here in this phase 4 leading mission, we're actually teaching them to look at their context with missionary eyes and how to analyze the situation, see what's needed spiritually, then come up with a plan about how to meet that need, and then recruit or sell that vision to others and recruit a team and actually pull it off. This is all learning opportunities. We are actually developing future leaders, not just within the church. They already got that in the phase 3 of leading leaders. We're actually moving them outside the four walls, but still within the shadow of the church. Okay. Once they get that done, they'll learn a lot about themselves through that experience. So you need to come back to them and say, hey, what's God showing you? What's He teaching you? What are your gifts? What are your abilities? What is God blessing in your life, in ministry? And then help them hone that and say, is God got a call in your life? And if they do, they sense some sort of call, we help them to enunciate whatever that is. And we help them get there. So that's phase 5, mission launch. Some of them may be feeling called to be an evangelist, a youth pastor, a missionary, a church planter, or they may even, if they're an educator, feel like they're called to be an educator. And so they're going to do that under the power of God. It doesn't have to be completely focused. But anyway, mission launch is the key here. I want you to don't overlook this. As we're talking about developing leaders, look at this process: leading self, then others, then leading leaders, leading out on mission, and mission launch. The end goal is to raise up leaders to deploy them into ministry, into God's ministry. Okay. It is not just to fill up our churches with good, sound Christians and or good leaders. No, that is not the end goal. The end goal is to send them out from our church. That is the end goal. And so many people do not look at the leadership development process in this format. They just focus on discipleship, which is a phase 1 and phase 2. That's it. They do not have any plan for encouraging folk and training them up into leading leaders, phase 3. I certainly don't give any thought to phase 4 of new ministries out in the community. And extremely rarely do they ever think about mission launch to actually release some of our brightest and best onto the mission field, wherever God leads them to serve. So I want to stop with that and use the rest of our time to try to answer some questions.
Kelton, can you hear me?
I can.
All right. Give me a second here. I wanted to talk with you just a little bit on the whole thing about pastor as a leader in the smaller church. Recently, I read uh, a new book by our friend Gary McIntosh, The Solo Pastor. And it's one of those books I wish that I had read back in my first church, which was it was a small church of about 60 people or so. And he points out that the highest value in these churches is people want safety, they want security, and they want a sense of peace. And so in these churches, the pastor is judged on whether or not he creates that sense of safety, that sense of peace, that sense of well-being for people. And that rather than leading on the basis of position or authority, the pastor has to lead through influence. And here was the sobering statistic he mentioned in the book that it takes 6 to 7 years of faithful preaching in what is basically the average sized church in America before the people will see the pastor as a leader and begin to join him in leading in the direction that the pastor is calling the church to go. So just want to give you an opportunity to with that. That's a sobering statistic, 6 to 7 years before a family sized church will follow the pastor. Wow.
I that I see that all the time. I do. The family chapel churches, they will always prefer a, if we're talking this profile terms, that a strong S, if you're familiar with that, a stabilizer, a person that is really good at maintaining the status quo is preferred. Strong in pastoral care, those churches will love those pastors more than anybody. Okay. Now, as
Mhm.
far as growth, though, those churches usually do not grow numerically. They will flatline, they will maintain status quo for years and years, but eventually they will decline as people move away and or die. Okay. So so I agree exactly with what you just pointed out. It echoes what is I've already presented. Our topic today is developing leaders. So within that context, how do you do that? And so I just echo what I said before. And you are an outsider as a pastor, and they're always going to look at an outsider askance. They're always going to give you that deer in the headlights look, or they're always going to tilt their head and wonder where you're coming from. But they don't do that if it's someone that's homegrown. If it's someone that is from one of the key families that is from, grew up in that church or in that neighborhood, there's an automatic acceptance of that individual because they know not only that fellow, but his daddy and his granddaddy and maybe his great granddaddy. There's a legacy there that they don't know just the fella Joe. They know Joe's family and all of his history. Okay. So they will accept Joe as a leader, even if he's unqualified, but
Right.
just because of his legacy. Work with it.
Work with it. I've got several questions here queued up. One is from David Ludwig, who is joining us, and he's asking, is the missional leadership pipeline, is that the digital resource that the North American Mission Board is using with church planters, or is something different?
It is. It's the very same one. It was developed for the church planters, and they saw it was so good and so useful that in the last couple of 3 years, they decided to take it outside just the church planting network and to
Okay.
promote it on a wide level. Okay. So I know at least here in North Carolina, all of our AMSs, our associational mission strategists in the state, former directors of missions for others that know that term, we're all globbing onto this. And we're restructuring our whole association, our leadership around this leadership pipeline. I see it as so invaluable. I love the fact that it points forward, not just evangelizing and discipling a new fella, but actually is intentional about raising up leaders and training them for deployment onto that mission field. I really like the comprehensive nature of it. So to answer your question, yes, it is the very same digital resource. So if you've got those data points or those resources available to you, it's the same model.
Yeah. There's a follow up question here that comes on the heels of that. And that is, how can the pastor of a smaller church access that pipeline?
All right. Tell you what, if you want to just email me, I got Mike Dobson, who is in my office here. We got a office for him here, and he's one of the people. I don't know if it's 3 or 4 people in the nation that's promoting this across everywhere. So I can
Okay.
forward you here his information.
All right. So is it okay if I go ahead and,
Yeah, put my email up.
okay, I'll do that so that David or whoever else wants to can grab that. And you want me to use your PWC?
Yeah, use the Raleigh one. Yeah, that'll work.
Okay, good. Yeah, we'll do that. And give me 1 second here. I'll get that taken care of. And then we've got one more question here. Let's see. I'll put it up. Okay, so your email there is going to be in the chat. So, David, if you grab that email from Kelton, then you'll be able to get access. He'll help you get that access there. So, good. All right. Now, let's see here. Here's a question. Actually, a couple of and asked a couple of different ways, different folks here. How should a pastor respond to passive leaders, leaders that do not communicate well, if at all? And then, on behalf of a couple of my clients that I work with, I'd add to that, or leaders who say yes, but never follow through on anything. So, how do you hit? That's a tough spot.
That's a nuanced question. Passivity can be brought on by any number of things. First of all, it can be a part of their nature. Again, let me refer back to this profile. If you're familiar with that, the upper two quadrants are initiators, and then the bottom two quadrants are responders, right? They're as you see down there, just by nature, they're are not going to be an initiator. Okay. So they're going to be considered somewhat passive. All right. They respond to others initiating. Okay. Um, so you got some that's like that. Now, also, you've heard the term of passive aggressive, right? So if you are, as a leader or pastor there, are initiating a lot of things, and you're upsetting the status quo, or stepping on somebody's toes, or making them uncomfortable in some way, they may become passive as a way of distancing themselves from you, trying not to encourage you or to engage you. They can't leave the church, but they're kind of stuck there. So they're just going to be quiet and wait till the storm blows over, may wait you out. They know that if you stay long enough, you'll get fired. Uh, so there's any number
Yeah,
of reasons
and
they might be passive. Okay.
right.
Now, in this communication, that's tough to leaders that do not communicate well, if at all. Leaders that do not communicate well, if at all. I'm thinking sometimes you have these E.F. Huttons in the room. I don't know if you're old enough to remember that commercial. When E.F.
Mhm.
Hutton speaks, everybody listens, right? So sometimes there's a leader that is really quiet that you don't even realize is a leader until you see them in action. And they'll have this big old long discussion about something. This one fellow will stand up and make a statement, and then it's all done. Suddenly all discussion stops. The E.F. Hutton has spoken. So no one else, it's all done. Whatever he says goes. And so sometimes they look like passive leaders, but they're actually actively listening, and they may be mature enough that they don't babble along with all their thoughts. They may just keep it to themselves and only speak once their thoughts are formulated. And that may take a while. That may take weeks, months, or years to really come to and verbalize their conclusion. My advice is for any leader that you inherit is to do your best to befriend them, encourage them, find any links that you can between your life and their life at any level, emotional level, better than anything, educationally, anything that y'all can have in common. Okay. Just build up trust and build up camaraderie between you so that if and when you have to have some challenging conversations, there's a context to do that, that they can
Mm.
actually engage and not be overwhelmed. You are the powerful person in the room, and we don't always understand what power we have. It's hard to appreciate that, but sometimes people are quiet because of that. They feel like it's an unequal conversation. You're very
Mhm.
powerful. They don't feel very powerful themselves. So anyway, just some thought.
So would that be a situation that is better dealt with one-on-one, where the pastor is cultivating that relationship
Yes,
with
absolutely.
the past leader or the inactive leader?
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Okay. And a related question to that is, what is the danger of using the pulpit to address these issues? That's probably the place where the pastor of the smaller church has the greatest exercise of power. Can that backfire when you're trying to kind of coax your established passive or inactive leader? Mm, any thoughts in that regard?
You know what? Negative motivation is very poor motivation. So if you're going to berate your parishioners from the pulpit, berate them, punish them, shame them, whatever, those are not effective mechanisms. Okay. Um, what is it? Honey attracts flies a lot more than vinegar does. I'm not sure what the phrase is, but anyway, you get the idea. Try to be kind. Try to be kind in your remarks and try to be kind in your thoughts towards people. Remember, the sheep are not your enemy. They are not your enemy. You are the shepherd. Remember that. The shepherd cares for his sheep. Even recalcitrant, obstinate, and stubborn sheep are still your sheep. God has placed them there and brought you to that particular flock for a reason. He's teaching you some things and he's teaching them some things. It goes both ways. Both of y'all are on the learning curve. Okay. So that
Right.
particular leader just requires more prayer on your part to get your heart right and your mind, okay, with them. But I do encourage, I would go the individual approach and just try to find what do we have anything in common? Can we find anything in common that we can build upon to build trust?
Mhm. Yep. That maybe suggests that previous pastors may not have been perhaps as effective as they could have been in discipling these leaders.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Who's been discipled? That's the question. As very few people have actually been discipled with any intentionality at all.
Fantastic. Okay. Appreciate that. Let's see. What else have we got in the queue? Okay. I think that's it for the moment. We don't have any other questions that are posed. So we're kind of coming up on the end of our time here. You've mentioned a couple of books, Lyle Schaller and some others in your presentation today. Are there any other resources for these pastors that would help them with this leadership process?
I would just make a commercial for Surround Pastors Boot Camp. That particular process is chock full of really helpful nuts and bolts information that is helpful for anyone wanting to grow a church numerically, turn things around, that sort of thing. Okay. I just got a commercial for that. It's wonderful. And they've got some online resources that have already been pre recorded that you can access for a small fee and be able to
Mhm.
watch and listen and look at PowerPoints and all kinds of stuff. I can't say more than that. Tons of books have been written. A lot has been written on the small church, serving the small church. And here in America, the small church is where it's at, honestly. This is where by far the majority of our churches are in a small church a mentality. But you do recognize in my presentation today, the small church wasn't really defined enough. I had to subdivide that into three different categories of small churches, and each one being different from the other. Okay. So it's very important to know what size small church are you actually working with. Okay. Okay. I see this question. Are boot camps still being ran? Where and when? Can you answer that?
Lost your video over there just a moment. Great. Okay. If there's no other questions, and I think we've covered the ground we can in the time allotted. So,
No.
Kel, I want to thank you so much. And and I put your email up there for any of the folks here that want to find out more about. Yep, we did have one more question just come in. I did put your email up for those that want to reach you here. So let's see here. Okay, this is from Gary. Our boot camp still being ran, when and where? Gary, yeah, I'll contact you here outside the webinar and we'll talk a little bit about that and we'll get you caught up there and let you know what the options are. So appreciate your interest. Well, Kelton, thanks for your time. I know that you're busy. You got a lot of pastors, a lot of churches, and you're a busy man, a dear brother in Christ, and love you dearly and just appreciate so much of your time today.
Thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit of what I've learned over the years. Hope it helps.
All right. God bless. And thanks all of you. And for those of you that'll catch the video a little bit later, if you want to get in touch with Kelton, please reach out to me and I'll establish that contact so that you can follow up with him. So we'll go ahead and pull the plug on this one.
Thank you.
God bless.